Story 1. When he lost his job, 2 years later, I started to put a dot on the calendar whenever he went to the casino while I was at work. The fact that I felt the need to do it was telling enough, but then when faced with it, he flat out denied how often he was going. He was going 3 to 4 times a week, and I found out later he was thousands of dollars in debt. I was out of there. Story 2. I don't even remember what the argument was about anymore, but when he grabbed me by the throat in the car, that was the moment. There's no going back from that or moving forward. I quietly made my exit plans, called off the engagement, and left. That was the first escalation, and I don't doubt that it would have increased over the years had I stayed. Story 3. When she asked me to bring her home fries after work, I stopped into McDonald's and got her 2 large fries. I came in with them. She proceeded to take the bag from me, open it up, pull out the fries, and throw them in the trash right in front of me. I was pretty shocked and asked what was wrong. I wanted frozen fries, she said, then asked why I even came over. This caused me to think really hard about things in the past, and there were so many other incidents like this that I just brushed off. Then I realized no matter what I did, she would resent and not be happy with me. Story 4. I found a text to his friend saying he saw no future with me. We had been together 4 years, and he had recently convinced me to leave my high-paying job to move to a small town for his career. Story 5. We were living together, super poor. One of our favorite bands, Big Sugar, came to town. We talked about it, but it wasn't in the budget. Friday night rolls around, and he's getting dressed to go out with the guys. Where are you off to? Big Sugar. What? We talked about this and decided we couldn't afford to go. Oh, we can't, but I can. Story 6. When I poured my heart out to her, talking about the things that I was passionate about, she looked at me and said, "I'm bored," with a self-amused look on her face, as if she thought she was being cute. Story 7. Left town for 2 weeks for a trip through the wilderness. I missed her like crazy and thought about how great it will be to see her once I get back. As soon as I get back home, I call her and the first thing she says is, "Oh wow, I didn't think about you at all. That really hurt, but it was the wake-up call I needed for that terrible relationship." Story 8. I was hit by a distracted driver as we were each traveling over 50 miles per hour. He collided with me at an angle toward the front of my car, causing me to spin across multiple lanes of traffic and go backward into a steep ditch off a major highway. He was my emergency contact, and my iPhone immediately notified him of my potential accident, as well as my location. He texted to ask if I was okay. I said I wasn't sure, but I had been hit at high speed and asked him to please come to the scene as I was very upset. He said he had just gone over to his parents' house for a barbecue and that he would check in with me later. I had a concussion for 2 weeks and was severely bruised everywhere. My dad ended up coming, and all my concussed brain could do was keep asking when my partner was going to arrive. My dad said, "Honey, he wouldn't leave a barbecue after you were in a serious car accident. I don't think he's ever coming." I found out 2 months later that he had also been cheating on me for about 8 months as well. This was all this year. Sometimes I still can't believe it. We were together for 3.5 years. Story 9. When we got in a fight, he punched a hole in the closet door, then went to the liquor store and took his anger out on the wrong person, who proceeded to hit him over the back of the head with a bottle and give him a skull fracture. He was absolutely insufferable. He refused treatment by the ambulance, refused to let me take him to the emergency room, and refused a second ambulance treatment. He had a splitting headache for days and finally let me take him to the emergency room after about 6 days, and he found out he had a skull fracture. When he got out, he needed round-the-clock observation for 2 weeks, and I had a job and a kid, so I couldn't do that. I called his mom, who came and took him, and when he came back, I had all of his stuff packed up in his van ready for him to move out. I did not play. Story 10. When my mother took her last breath in front of me, I became very distraught, to say the least. Among many other bad things, like losing my friend group, family being vultures over my mother's estate, and my father making shady moves that I am 99% sure he did to stress out my mom to make her die faster, I poured it all out to my girlfriend at the time, and she told me I was too much to deal with. I did not have to make the choice, though, because she decided to cut herself out of my life. She chose to fully ghost me while I was busy struggling to set up all the particulars after death, like the funeral. Story 11. Lord, there were lots of cheating during pregnancy, which should have been the moment of realization, but honestly, I was deeply entrenched in a mental health crisis and couldn't see the forest for the trees, let alone evaluate the longevity of my relationship with the father of my child. The real moment of clarity came 10 days postpartum. I was recovering from an emergency cesarean section after a traumatic 36-hour labor, the most pain I've ever experienced. He was out running errands, and I asked him to grab me a coffee. He told me it was out of his way and he couldn't. I was shocked. An hour later, he walked in with a gas station coffee, and I remember thinking, oh, he's pulled through. It's not the best coffee, but it's the thought that counts. Well, I was wrong. It was a coffee he purchased for himself. I realized in that moment that I wasn't even really a person to this guy. He literally did not see my humanity or care for me in the slightest. He said he wanted to marry me, but he couldn't even get me a coffee under those circumstances because it would require him going 5 minutes out of his way. Story 12. A friend told me, "It's been a year that I hear you tell me the same stories about him, the same rants, the same complaints. I don't tire of you, my friend, but don't you tire of repeating yourself? Will you be telling me the same words in 6 months, 6 years, 16 years? Story 13. She chose alcohol over me. She was in the hospital with liver failure from alcohol for the 3rd time. I packed my things and left. I'm still alcohol-free 423 days later. Story 14. When he hyped up my birthday present for a month and it was a $12 pair of red-framed sunglasses from Target. That's it. Also, when we were together for 7 years and he was asking me if he should make a huge decision. I thought he meant an engagement ring. He was asking me if he should cheat on me in subtext when he asked me if he should make this huge decision. Dude was evil. Story 15. He was showing me pictures from his trip to Mexico. He goes 3 months a year for family, and scrolled past an album titled My Love. It wasn't of me. We had been together 6 years. Story 16. His hand was around my neck, and he was choking me until blackness started gathering in the corners of my eyes. I wondered if I was ever going to see my mom and dad again. When he let go and oxygen flooded my brain, all I could think was how I could never excuse this. The moment it was safe, I was leaving him. Story 17. When he proposed, I knew he didn't mean it when he asked, and I knew it didn't count when I said yes. We'd been together for 6 years, and I was telling him I was unhappy with the fact that things had stagnated. It was one of many talks like that, and I was crying. He knelt down and asked me to marry him. I felt like I had to say yes, so I did. But I knew in the moment it wasn't real. We cuddled for a few minutes before I said I didn't think he'd meant it. His response was, "Well, you kind of forced my hand." The whole thing felt so gross and so unfair. Nothing changed after that. We never talked about that moment again. I broke up with him a few months later. Story 18. He told me he did not want me to go to a concert for a band we both liked because he was taking his new girlfriend and did not want there to be any issues. That is how I found out that we were not exclusive. I broke up straight away. About 2 years later, we met randomly, and he ended up crying about how unhappy he was with her, how much he missed me, and how even though they lived together, he slept on the couch. Yeah, sure, buddy. Story 19. When he admitted he had caused someone to have a serious car accident on purpose because he didn't want to let them merge on a busy street, I stopped trusting him entirely. Story 20. Small fights started to last longer and with less provocation, and she wasn't particularly eager to make up afterward. Basically, that's when she stopped trying. Story 21. When I realized I had enough of never being enough for her. It's only been 4 months, and it still hurts like crazy. We had just celebrated 5 years in April. Story 22. When I cried about him doing nothing for my birthday or Valentine's Day, and he ignored me and watched videos on TikTok as I sobbed next to him in bed. Or when I asked him why he was constantly lying to me and he replied, "Well, there are no consequences, so." Story 23. When I took her to a movie that I had wanted to see for several years, the only thing she said afterward was, "We do not have a lot of things in common." Story 24. We were talking about his night, He had a friend over to hang out. Him, my friend got pretty drunk. Me, oh, so is he staying at your place tonight then? Him, no, he drove home. Me, wait, you let him drive home drunk? Him, I'm not on the road. Why should I care? Me, I realized then that, yeah, this guy was very attractive but emotionally cold inside. Zero empathy. He would have happily stayed with me permanently too. But 3 weeks after I ended our 3.5 year relationship, he was with another person. I quite literally meant nothing to him. Story 25. The moment she walked out when I told her I had liver cancer. Her group of women told her she deserved better than a sick person. Went into remission. She tried crawling back. Story 26. When I found out he had additional social media accounts with the uncropped versions that he had sent to me, I realized he didn't go on a road trip with just the boys. Story 27. Long story, but it was really after he tackled me in the woods after fighting with me on my birthday, and he convinced me to come home with him, and he trapped me in his car and wouldn't take me home because he knew I was leaving. I didn't say, but we both knew. I had to threaten to jump out of a moving vehicle for him to take me home, and he made me promise to come in the house with him. I did keep that promise, and I was looking at him sitting on the bed, and that's really when it hit me it was done. We actually dated 1 more month, and it was a horrible month. He threw the engagement ring at me and punched everything during one of those last fights. Story 28. Her parents caught us mid-elopement in the backyard, just as her dog, draped in a scarf, was about to officiate. 50 stuffed animals looked on as witnesses, their button eyes filled with silent judgment. Before we could seal the deal, her mom called out, "Hey, come inside. It's time for lunch." So we abandoned our vows, switched gears, and spent the afternoon playing pirate and princess instead. We never went back to our wedding day after that. Guess the magic was one time only. Story 29. When she told me that she had changed her mind and wanted to have kids, that was the beginning of the end because our differences and how much we had grown apart over the years became extremely apparent in the ensuing discussions and arguments. Our visions for the future could not have been any more opposite. Story 30. Would constantly tell me, "We all have options," as a way to scare me into silence when I would bring up something I thought really needed to be talked about in our relationship. After the third time of that, I realized he was right. We do have options. Mine was to find a man who wasn't a piece of shit. Story 31. I dated a woman who turned into a beast when she was hungry. It happened often. Right after eating, she would be fine. She would say things like, "Wow, I feel so much better now." When I pointed out the correlation between being angry because of hunger and the difficulties it caused, she refused to see it, refused the idea that hunger was what caused her to be so different. So, I knew she was a complete moron, and it would never work out. Story 32. I was sexually assaulted, and I couldn't tell him or talk about it because I knew he would twist it into it being my fault or seeing it as me cheating. I didn't tell anybody ever. In that realization, I knew it was over. Story 33. I realized with the previous boyfriend that that person wouldn't become my husband when he wouldn't reciprocate my efforts nor consider my options too. Our goals were too different and we weren't compatible. Story 34. When I realized that he didn't want to go through the hard things with me, it became clear that my struggles were nothing more than an inconvenience for him and that I would never be a priority. Over our 10-year relationship, I made excuses for his behavior and justified the ways that he didn't support me. The last straw was when I got sick and needed support, and he didn't show up. He didn't understand that he should have been there and told me that I should have just asked. I did ask, but he said he'd rather play video games. I finally realized that it was time to move on. I told him I was done and packed my things the next day. It was the best decision I've made. Story 35. When he said, "After I kill myself, you and him can just get married." After telling him over the phone about how I had a fun time hanging out with my friend, we had been together for almost 7 years. I thought he was joking, but then he proceeded to tell me that he knew I had a crush on him, even though I didn't, and that he was serious. I started crying and asking him why he would say that. We were engaged. What happened in the year after that moment was the most insane psychological abuse I have ever gone through that permanently changed my life. Story 36. He told me I wasn't super feminine, like you're feminine, but not like the woman in porn feminine. He also couldn't decide if he wanted to be with me or not because I didn't appreciate the same music and wasn't spiritual for not having tried psychedelics. Apparently, we didn't share the same interests. By interests, he means curiosity for the unknown, but this man has no day job and spends his days on YouTube and Reddit, whereas I work full-time. It was pretty much a deal breaker when he said he wants to experience with other women because he's never had women be interested in him but feels as if he is now in a better place mentally and physically to be able to achieve this, but didn't want to lose me completely, so asked for me to rekindle in 5 years. I've been happily single for 2 years.